Edgemont High was not the sort of school that welcomed headlines. Nestled on the edge of a sleepy town, it was mostly known for its underwhelming sports teams, its temperamental vending machines, and average student testing. For the most part, it was unremarkable, just quiet and predictable. Until, of course, the disappearances began. Started slowly, one student, then another. Freshmen mostly. They were mostly the kids who sat near the back, and didn't raise their hands too often. The kind who could vanish and barely be missed or noticed. Mrs. Penrose, the drama teacher, was the first to notice. She reported that Marcy Tillman hadn't shown up for rehearsal and hadn't been seen in 2 days. Then Mr. Carson from the science department mentioned his lab assistant had disappeared mid-period. By the 3rd week, 4 students had been reported missing. The faculty meetings grew longer. The town buzzed with theories. Police came and left with frown of unresolved cases. Students whispered in hallways and cast paranoid glances at every person. But no one suspected the smiling, soft-spoken substitute who had quietly taken over room 309. Ms. Lyall had arrived at Edgemont High only 3 weeks prior. No one remembered exactly who hired her. Her transfer paperwork had been approved and stamped, but the district HR director swore he'd never seen it. Still, she seemed qualified. More than qualified, really. She was graceful, neatly dressed, and always wore deep burgundy lipstick that never smudged. She floated down hallways, turning the heads of several other teachers and the principal with her poise and beauty. The odd thing about her, though, was she never brought lunch. She never stopped by the teacher's lounge for snacks. She didn't ask questions about the lunch specials. She didn't attend social hours or drink from the communal coffee pot. Never even touched the cafeteria food. In fact, not one person at the school ever saw her eat a meal. Yet somehow she always looked satisfied. The students called her Lush Lyall behind her back. Not because of anything scandalous, but because of her growing figure. First she was svelte, but week by week, her waist thickened and her stomach swelled. The buttons of her dresses grew tighter. Ms. Lyall always wore these deep plunging neckline dresses that showed off her assets quite beautifully. These dresses were always tight and form-fitting to her plump body. But on occasion, one of the buttons on her dress would come flying across the room, exposing slightly more cleavage than she had anticipated showing that day. The students in her classroom loved the sight of her. Sometimes they would be so mesmerized by her figure, the sound of her voice, and the movement of her perfectly luscious lips, that class seemed to just fly by each day. Lately, Ms. Lyall's buttocks was getting noticeably larger by the day. She would often accidentally rub the shoulders of her students with her hips as she walked down each column of desks in her classroom. The students would inhale deeply to smell the scent of her perfume mixed with the natural scent of her hips as she walked by. It smelled faintly of lavender and something else, something meatier. Eventually, her butt had gotten so big she had to hand papers to the front row of students and ask them to pass them back to the back rows because she just couldn't fit between the desks anymore. Ms. Lyall started to wear flowing shawls and long cardigans over her tight dresses, in a half-hearted attempt to hide her ever-growing butt and her belly. But it was impossible to ignore. Her butt became so round it wobbled when she walked. Heads would turn at the sight of her bodacious buttocks swaying back and forth between the halls. Her body rumbled when she stood still, as her butt cheeks jiggled before becoming still again. Her giant belly would bounce up and down along with her cleavage. Students watched as her body would come to a halt, with jaws dropping before her eyes. One student swore they saw her stomach move on its own. Her waist was widening more. Her belly swelled like bread rising in an oven, and her dresses stretched so much they started becoming sheer, exposing the outline of her underwear beneath it. Some students said her belly gurgled when she was still. Others claimed they saw her hand glide lovingly over her swelled belly in class, like she was cradling something inside. They would watch as her perfectly manicured hands made gentle circles, rubbing her belly in clockwise motions. And one by one, students continued to vanish. The first time it happened, she didn't mean to. Marcy Tillman had wandered into room 309 after school, lost and looking for the library. Ms. Lyall turned from the chalkboard and smiled. "Oh, sweetling. Are you here for remedial reading?" Marcy blinked. "No, I was just..." But the door clicked shut behind her. What happened next was quite an elegant feeding. Ms. Lyall drifted across the room like a specter. Her mouth opened wide. Her luscious lips spread open to reveal a darkness inside her jaw that seemed to pull in the light. Marcy didn't scream. She gasped. She was lifted gently, almost lovingly, into the air, as if caught by an invisible breeze. Her arms flailed a few times, and then she slid headfirst between Ms. Lyall's waiting lips. The teacher's throat bulged slightly to accommodate Marcy's child stature, then sank. Ms. Lyall's midsection expanded subtly, and just like that, Marcy was gone. After that, it became easier. Logan Hennessy had detention. Like the good teacher she was, Ms. Lyall volunteered to supervise. She offered him a mint before she grew bored of his muttering. With a sigh, she rose, and the room grew still. He stood to ask a question, but before he was able to get the words out, she opened her mouth, and it was like the floor fell away. There was a pulling sensation, a gravity that tugged at him from within her core. His legs flailed as he was slowly and quietly inhaled, like steam into a vent. No one saw him again. She patted her growing belly, sighed deeply, and returned to her grading as if nothing had happened. Ernestine Cole had a habit of skipping class and sneaking into unused rooms with cute boys to have quick make-out sessions. One day things got too heated as she was kissing this boy from her history class. She took all her clothes off in the heat of the moment, but when they both finished, she forgot to put all her clothes back on. She ended up leaving a pair of panties in room 309 and decided to go back inside to get them before the principal found them and gave her detention. She stumbled into room 309 the next day, thinking no one would be in there, but Ms. Lyall had just finished grading some papers in there. "Oh dear," she said softly. "You've lost your way." Ernestine turned to leave, but the door wouldn't budge. Behind her, Ms. Lyall's footsteps were soundless. "Did you forget something in my classroom?" Ms. Lyall asked, as she lifted up Ernestine's dirty panties with her index finger. "Oh, those aren't mine," Ernestine said nervously. "I think they belong to you," Ms. Lyall said softly as she brought her panties to her face and gave a long whiff in front of Ernestine. "They sure smell like you." Before Ernestine could speak, Ms. Lyall's arms reached impossibly wide, trapping Ernestine between them. Ernestine turned away, and that's when she saw Ms. Lyall's mouth expand. She tried to wiggle away, but Ms. Lyall's stomach was so big, there was no place left to run. Ernestine moved 3 steps before she was lifted clean off her feet and consumed, inch by inch, by a teacher with a belly that began to softly churn with active stomach acid. Ms. Lyall smoothed her dress, as she noticed several of her buttons had become undone in the process of devouring her meal. She proceeded to lift her gigantic belly onto her desk as it made a loud vibrating splat. Then she sank into her teacher's chair and closed her eyes as she began to take a satisfied nap in school. By the time 15 students had vanished, Principal Hurley could no longer hide behind emails and evacuation drills as excuses for these missing students. Parents and teachers were becoming increasingly alarmed at what was happening at Edgemont High. Principal Hurley was a tall, stocky man with an overgelled pompadour and a collection of novelty ties. He stayed late one Thursday evening, seated behind a stack of untouched incident reports. On the grainy security feed, he watched room 309's door crack open. A nervous student slipped inside. His name was Perry Knoll. He was a junior known for lateness and forgetfulness. Principal Hurley leaned in closer to watch the security feed. Inside, Ms. Lyall stood by her desk, towering and wide. Her stomach moved around like something alive. Her expression was unusually gleeful. The camera's quality wasn't good, but what Principal Hurley saw next stopped his breath. Her silhouette tilted forward. Her jaw yawned open unnaturally wide. And Perry, poor Perry, stumbled backward as if pulled. There was no struggle, only the slow, steady descent of a teenager disappearing into the shadows of a teacher's mouth. Seconds later, the feed glitched. When it returned, Ms. Lyall was seated peacefully, daintily grading away at papers. Perry was gone, but he never left the room. The next evening, Principal Hurley waited for Ms. Lyall in the hallway, just outside room 309. She emerged with grace, her bloated belly nearly touching the doorknob as she pulled it closed. Her face glistened with sweat, and her dress was stretched to its limits. "You've been busy," he said, arms folded, trying intentionally not to look down at the buttons that looked like they would burst open in front of his face. She blinked, as though waking from a dream. "Mr. Hurley," she purred, voice syrupy. "You've eaten them all, haven't you?" Principal Hurley asked her firmly. She smiled. "I suppose you'll need to discipline me then," she said, arching one eyebrow like she couldn't care less. His eyes narrowed. "Maybe you need a spanking." Ms. Lyall paused. For the first time she looked surprised, then delighted. "Sure, why don't you come a little closer and punish me then?" Principal Hurley excitedly takes a few steps closer toward her as Ms. Lyall's menacing grin spreads across her face. She steps close to Principal Hurley and presses her large bosom and warm full belly into Principal Hurley's chest, squeezing him against herself. Ms. Lyall's belly starts sloshing aggressively as she opens her mouth wide, exposing the dark, endless tunnel into her throat. The principal didn't resist. He gasped something indignant, something inappropriate, but it vanished halfway through as his head was swallowed whole. One arm flailed, one shoe dropped, then with one giant gulp, nothing was left of Principal Hurley. Ms. Lyall's belly ballooned. She belched delicately and then fanned herself with a hall pass, as her eyes closed slightly with satisfaction and pleasure. On Monday morning, Ms. Lyall stood at the podium in the auditorium. "Due to unforeseen circumstances," she said, "I will be assuming administrative duties." Behind her, the school board nodded mechanically. Her stomach gurgled loudly under her new velvet blazer. Everyone heard it, but no one mentioned it. No one dared. Staff avoided eye contact. Students sat straighter. One brave freshman asked where Principal Hurley had gone. Ms. Lyall tilted her head and smiled. "He's part of me now." No one asked again. Ms. Lyall continued. "In the interest of improving school morale and safety, there will be a few new policies. First, hallway cameras will be removed. They are such an invasion of privacy. Second, all students will report to room 309 during their free periods, for enrichment. Third," she paused, placing a hand over her enormous stomach as it let out a wet, slow gurgle. No one clapped. No one moved. Over the following weeks, Edgemont High transformed under Ms. Lyall's direction. The faculty complied with eerie obedience. Students whispered legends in bathroom stalls. That if you skipped class, she'd find you. That her stomach held an entire library of lost souls, some still conscious, others softly quoting Shakespeare in her belly. The detectives inspecting the school had been ordered to drop the case. Students started transferring to other schools. Students took the long way to class, intentionally avoiding the East Wing, where room 309 was altogether. The school became much quieter. Just the low gurgling sound of something always digesting behind the principal's office door. Sometimes on rainy days, she'd lean back in the principal's chair, listening to her belly groan with deep satisfaction. She would smile as she rubbed her belly fondly and murmur, Nothing like tenure.